A.1.1. What does anarchy mean? The word anarchy is from the Greek prefix an or a, meaning not, the want of, the absence of, or the lack of, plus archos, meaning a ruler, director, chief, person in charge, or authority. Or, as Peter Kropotkin put it, anarchy comes from the Greek words meaning contrary to authority. While the Greek words anarchos and anarchia are often taken to mean having no government or being without a government, as can be seen, the strict original meaning of anarchism was not simply no government. Anarchy means without a ruler, or more generally, without authority. And it is in this sense that anarchists have continually used the word. For example, we find Kropotkin arguing that anarchism, open quote, attacks not only capital, but also the main sources of the power of capitalism, law, authority, and the state, end quote. For anarchists, anarchy means, open quote, not necessarily absence of order, as is generally supposed, but an absence of rule, end quote. Hence David Wick's excellent summary, open quote. Anarchism can be understood as the generic social and political idea that expresses negation of all power, sovereignty, domination, and hierarchical division, and a will to their dissolution. Anarchism is therefore more than anti-statism, even if government, or the state, is appropriately the central focus of anarchist critique, end quote. For this reason, rather than being purely anti-government or anti-state, anarchism is primarily a movement against hierarchy. Why? Because hierarchy is the organizational structure that embodies authority. Since the state is the highest form of hierarchy, anarchists are, by definition, anti-state. But this is not a sufficient definition of anarchism. This means that real anarchists are opposed to all forms of hierarchical organization, not only the state. In the words of Brian Morris, open quote, the term anarchy comes from the Greek and essentially means no ruler. Anarchists are people who reject all forms of government or coercive authority, all forms of hierarchy and domination. They are, therefore, opposed to what the Mexican anarchist Flores Magón called the somber trinity: state, capital, and the church. Anarchists are thus opposed to both capitalism and to the state, as well as to all forms of religious authority. But anarchists also seek to establish or bring about by varying means a condition of anarchy, that is, a decentralized society without coercive institutions, a society organized through a federation of voluntary associations, end quote. Reference to hierarchy in this context is a fairly recent development. The classical anarchists such as Proudhon, Bakunin, and Kropotkin did use the word, but rarely. They usually preferred authority, which was used as shorthand for authoritarian. However, it's clear from their writings that theirs was a philosophy against hierarchy, against any inequality of power or privileges between individuals. Bakunin spoke of this when he attacked official authority but defended natural influence, and also when he said, open quote, do you want to make it impossible for anyone to oppress his fellow man? Then make sure that no one shall possess power, end quote. As Jeff Drawn notes, open quote, while it has always been a latent part of the revolutionary project, only recently has this broader concept of anti-hierarchy arisen for more specific scrutiny. Nonetheless, the root of this is plainly visible in the Greek roots of the word anarchy, end quote. We stress that this opposition to hierarchy is, for anarchists, not limited to just the state or government. It includes all authoritarian economic and social relationships as well as political ones, particularly those associated with capitalist property and wage labor. This can be seen from Proudhon's argument that, open quote, capital in the political field is analogous to government. The economic idea of capitalism, the politics of government or of authority, and the theological idea of the church are three identical ideas linked in various ways. To attack one of them is equivalent to attacking all of them. What capital does to labor and the state to liberty, the church does to the spirit. This trinity of absolutism is as baneful in practice as it is in philosophy. The most effective means for oppressing the people would be simultaneously to enslave its body, its will, and its reason." End quote. Thus we find Emma Goldman opposing capitalism as it meant, open quote, "that man or woman must sell his or her labor, and therefore that his or her inclination and judgment are subordinated to the will of a master." End quote. 40 years earlier, Bakunin made the same point when he argued that under the current system, open quote, "the worker sells his person and his liberty for a given time," end quote, to the capitalist in exchange for a wage. Thus, anarchy means more than just no government. It means opposition to all forms of authoritarian organization and hierarchy. In Kropotkin's words, open quote, "the origin of the anarchist inception of society lies in the criticism of the hierarchical organizations and the authoritarian conceptions of society, and the analysis of the tendencies that are seen in the progressive movements of mankind." End quote. For Malatesta, anarchism, open quote, "was born in a moral revolt against social injustice, in that the specific causes of social ills could be found in capitalistic property and the state. When the oppressed sought to overthrow both state and property, then it was that anarchism was born." End quote. Thus, any attempt to assert that anarchy is purely anti-state is a misrepresentation of the word and the way has been used by the anarchist movement. As Brian Morris argues, open quote, "when one examines the writings of classical anarchists, as well as the character of anarchist movements, it is clearly evident that it has never had this limited vision of just being against the state. It has always challenged all forms of authority and exploitation, and has been equally critical of capitalism and religion as it has been of the state." End quote. And just to state the obvious, anarchy does not mean chaos, nor do anarchists seek to create chaos or disorder. Instead, we wish to create a society based upon individual freedom and voluntary cooperation. In other words, order from the bottom up, not disorder imposed from the top bottom by authorities. Such a society would be a true anarchy, a society without rulers. While we discuss what an anarchy could look like in Section I, Noam Chomsky sums up the key aspect when he stated that in a truly free society, open quote, "any interaction among human beings that is more than personal, meaning that takes institutional forms of one kind or another, in community or workplace, family, larger society, whatever it may be, should be under direct control of its participants." So that would mean workers' councils in industry, popular democracy in communities, interaction between them, free associations in larger groups, up to organization of international society. End quote. Society would no longer be divided into a hierarchy of bosses and workers, governors and governed. Rather, an anarchist society would be based on free association in participatory organizations and run from the bottom up. Anarchists, it should be noted, try to create as much of this society today in their organizations, struggles, and activities as they can.